So first off, I'll introduce myself. So I'm Troy McVeigh. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Carbon60. I've been in the industry for 20 plus years. My previous experience has been basically primarily helping the enterprise and service providers, increase agility, reduce risk, and gain efficiency. So the topic we're going to talk about today is how to mitigate and manage risk with a proper DR strategy and plan. And so I've spent a lot of time consulting with the enterprise and service providers in this space. And so we'll go through this. So a little bit about Carbon60. So this is just an infographic here of an understanding of our business. We've been around for 20 plus years, have around 500 customers in a whole bunch of different verticals, public sector, associations. We have about 85 employees, with about 60 of them are in customer support. And, we basically focus, we're a Canadian managed cloud provider. And we have a total of 7 data centers, a footprint from a footprint perspective in Canada, as well as some outposts in the UK, as well as in the US. And from really at the end of the day, from a business perspective, we do manage cloud, and that's, runs the whole gamut of private and multi-tenant, including public and hyperscale cloud. So to set the stage for our discussion today, availability is critical to customer confidence and brand reputation. And this is basically an IDC study that basically states that 91% of the enterprises have had a tech related business disruption in the past 2 years. 84% of them have experienced a malicious attack in the past 12 months. And they come, basically looking at an average financial cost of the availability and protection gaps of around $21 million. So when we look today at what we consider the top causes of data loss and downtime, the first one I often refer to as just power. And if you look here, 25% UPS system failure, 6% generator failure. I've seen many of these in my career, and they're often an unplanned outage. An example I'll use all the time is with generators running data centers, transfer switch failures. I've even seen simple things, as a customer had a new generator, a single generator, and didn't realize that the battery in the generator was not being charged by the generator. And they went through a number of tests with it, but when it came time for an actual failure, the generator wouldn't start. And it's pretty hard for 24-volt systems, so it's pretty hard to do jumper cables in that case. The next category is what basically IT equipment and environmentals. Crack failures or the environmental side. If you can't cool a data center, your equipment typically is only going to run for a short period of time before a thermal event happens. The other one is 4% IT equipment failure. It happens less. You build a lot of redundancy and availability into your systems from an IT infrastructure perspective, so we see less of it. But often, one of the common ones we would see in that space would be network failures. Human error at 22%. Seen many in my careers, fat finger problems, or through a migration, massive data loss through some human error challenges. And then the last one is cybercrime. And this one is something we see a fair amount of at 11%. I know of several businesses, large scale companies, that have had massive downtime due to basically crypto locker type scenarios. And those crypto locker type viruses are basically getting more and more complex in how and what they attack, with the goal of making it harder for companies to mitigate against the risk of it. So in summary, 1 in 3 companies have declared a major disaster in the past 5 years. And again, being a part of that consulting world, I've been involved in several, companies in a rescue fashion from large scale failures. So I kind of have boiled DR down to 3 simple questions. The first question is always, do I have my data? And it's pretty much the most important question, because if you don't have your data, everything else is basically a waste of time. The second question is, can I present my data? So if you have it, typically today it's either delivered through servers or applications. And can I actually present my data through those servers and applications? And then the last one is, can my people access the data? And again, it's one of those things. If I have my data, if I can present it, and my people can't get to it, then it becomes, it still could be considered at that point in time an outage. Now, what's interesting is the people question used to be in doing DR and business continuity consulting, the people aspect of it has been, one of the challenges, pre-COVID. Most organizations, or a lot of organizations, may not have had the ability to operate with people from home. And now with COVID-19, that's really kind of rewritten that, as a vast majority of people today have or companies have the capability of the vast majority of their people working from home. One thing I want to mention is, talking about DR plans and business continuity, I used to use a graphic of an iceberg, and the DR being the above the water and the business continuity being below the water. Just want to draw the distinction between a disaster recovery plan and a business continuity plan. So what we're talking about here is the disaster recovery side of it. One other interesting fact here, I bring it up all the time, is if you only have number 1, a lot of the time that is referred to as poor man's DR. I.e., I've witnessed many companies, they just replicate their data somewhere, but they don't have a way to present it, and they don't have a way for people to get to it. And again, it's often referred to as poor man's DR. So when we look at the cost of downtime and the cost of these outages, I often refer to them as the hard and fast costs and the slow and soft costs. The hard and fast costs are really easy in a lot of cases to calculate. If you're down, it could be a production or sales losses. Most organizations know what their business does from a revenue perspective, sales and productivity. So if you're unable to operate, it's pretty easy to add up those costs and figure out what they are. Recovery effort is another one. What's it going to take for me to do this? And recovery effort may involve other consultants, an effort outside of your own staff, including your own staff. So you have to factor in that recovery effort as part of what I call the hard and fast cost. The last one here is ransom payments. And it's funny because, I hear the stories of don't pay the ransom, but I've been around companies and witnessed that they've actually paid it. And it's because they had no other option, and it was pretty much a lesser cost than the other options that they've had. Again, it's not something you advocate against, but the reality is I've witnessed it in my career several times. The other side is the slow and soft costs. And for me, that is where things get ugly. And the reason why I have the $2 signs on it, talk about things like employee morale. Just was witness to a company that I was aware of that went through a pretty huge crypto locker incident, and they were down for at least 2 to 3 weeks. And the employee morale, I mean, there were people in the business, saying, holy, like, when are we going to get this back? And it was just a stressful time for the organization to be down like that. The future challenges, I talk about that all the time, is I've witnessed a company that basically went through a crypto locker and actually came out of it, only to find out months later that their actual data was compromised as well. And they ended up, a client of theirs, actually sued them in the end because of the fact that their data was exposed during that period of time. And then the brand damage. I get this all the time where CIOs or CEOs, they say all the time when it comes to this is keep me out of the news. And, the target breach and any large scale outage, the last thing any CIO or CEO wants is basically public awareness of this stuff. So to kind of simplify the disaster recovery 101, there's three main things or pillars that we have to accommodate when you're looking at building a disaster recovery plan. And the first one is, define the RPO and RTOs. The second is assess and map dependencies. And the third is basically taking all that data and building a DR solution or plan. And I have solutions and plans in here because it's very often that there's no singular magic DR solution, and it ends up being multiple solutions and a plan that basically is built to accommodate them. So let's look at the first part, which is the recovery point and time objective. And most people are aware what these are, but the reality is our recovery point objective is just how much data are you willing to lose, and the recovery time objective is how long you're willing to be down. And these are the most important things when it comes to a proper DR planning. And I'll tell you why. It's very often it's super important that all the business units, application and data owners, and anybody in the business is aware of what these specific recovery point and time objectives are. You need to set expectations clearly to avoid challenges in the event of a real disaster. And what I'll explain is everybody feels like if there's an outage, everybody feels like their actual data and their application is the most important data and application in the business. And you go through the exercise to assigning that value, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. So when you look at defining an RPO and an RTO, you have to look at it from a practical approach. So the first one is assess and identify. So you need to be able to understand the applications and the data that the organization uses, basically an assessment and an inventory of all those aspects, and they can be grouped by business unit and whatnot. The next part is you have to assign a value to them, and that value is there to define back to the original RPO and RTO question is basically how long can I be down and how much data can I lose. So a practical approach in this, you can go through a full BI, a business impact analysis, and go through in-depth stuff with this. But what I've learned in my career that works really well, basically a practical approach is you end up defining 3 tiers, and you come up with an appropriate cost to provide each of those tiers. So the example here is tier 0 is a 1-hour RPO RTO, tier 1 is a 4-hour RPO and RTO, and tier 2 is a 24-hour best effort. And the reason why you do that is if you understand kind of high level what the costs are to deliver each one of those tiers, it sets the stage up when you're asking the business or the group within the business or application owner, when you're asking them the question on how important is their data. And often what I've witnessed in my career is, if you ask every group, they're going to say it's super important. To me, it's the most important thing in the business, but the reality is that may not be the case. So often what's happened is, obviously with tier 0, there's typically a more expensive cost than delivering a tier 1 or a 24-hour RPO RTO. So often it level sets the equation or the conversation with the customer, because they'll say, well, I need to be tier 0, and then you show them you have an associated cost, and then they might say, well, maybe I'm tier 1, right? In that sense, yeah, so that's basically it. So in the disaster recovery 101, the next step is basically, defining and assessing applications and associated dependencies. This is super important because once you have an RPO and an RTO defined, you need to be able to map the applications, to those RPO and RTOs. And this is where the dependencies and relationships come into play. Sometimes we use tools to do that, whether it's being able to understand a complex application to make sure that we are aware of what actually a dependency is for that application. Witnessed it before, where you build a whole DR plan with an application to find out that it talks to this NFS mount that you didn't bring along with the actual recovery. So these dependencies and relationships are super important. And you also then have to layer in the requirements such as networking, security, performance, growth. I mean, these are kind of the parameters of understanding what those applications look like. The example would be performance, because if an application is critical and you have it in your site, then it needs to be critical in the DR site. You have to make sure that the performance characteristics of it operating in DR can provide, what the expected performance metrics would be of that. And then the last one is the life cycle and project plans. Another area of witness is, organizations looking for, life cycle plans of an application and what they're doing with it. So if you know that in a year, this application is going to be modernized and it may take a different approach to providing availability, it's important really at the end of the day. The one thing I want to talk about, mention here too as well, is when you talk about these dependencies, often you will have applications that are dependencies for everything that get elevated to the lowest tier. And an example would be, Active Directory, right? So everything in the business relies on Active Directory. So even though Active Directory itself may not show up in someone saying what my application's worth, you know that the first step is that these applications, they all require Active Directory. So Active Directory needs to be there as part of that. So basically, once you have all of this, you basically start to look at mapping out a solution. Now, I want to talk about the applications themselves in a unique approach here. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of the pets versus cattle discussion. And, essentially, it's the difference between in architecture and design of systems. And when you think of a pet, they're indispensable, they're unique, and they never can be down. So if Fido here is sick, it's a big deal, because if something bad happens to Fido, there's a huge, it has a huge issue with it. On the opposite side of that is the whole cattle side, which is basically, systems that are designed for failure. They are replaceable. So on the left is Fido, and on the right is, Cal 1 through 10, right? And these are kind of the modern applications, how they're built today. And on the left-hand side are often legacy systems. So the last part is you group and align all of your applications and against your RTOs and RPOs, and you look at possible methodologies and solutions that might actually provide the capability that you're looking at. And when I say methodologies, talking about active, passive, whether it's a hosted DR or it's in the cloud. And then the last part is you basically look to implement it. To keep going with it is basically to test, and more test. So some things here to consider as part of this is kind of lessons learned in doing DR consulting in a large number of enterprise and service provider type organizations. The first one is the DR tests. Get comfortable with DR tests. I've said it a million times to customers. You do not want the first line in your DR plan to be polish your resume. And I've witnessed it. I've actually seen people lose their job because of a massive mistake in not actually fully testing out something from a DR test. The next thing that I've learned in my career is always consider a proper DR plan always needs to have a last option available. And what that means is that if you look at the tiers, 0 through 1, when we, or 0 through 2, when we defined out our RPOs and RTOs, typically the last tier, anything with a 24-hour or greater RPO and RTO, is often able to be done satisfied with the backup solution. And so the reality is if something is in a tier 0, everything needs a backup. So all of the things in tier 0 should have a backup and should have additional options available in the event of recovery. I've actually witnessed where organization had some sort of issue with one of their replication mechanisms. And of course, at that point in time, you need to go to what you have available to recover from. The other thing I want to mention there in that is that if you are using replication technology, make sure that it can do point-in-time recovery in that replication. So it can keep a number of the replicated copies. Very useful in the CryptoLocker scenarios when you have the capability to roll back from a replication perspective to minutes before that actual CryptoLocker took place. The isolate environments. This I've seen witnessed many times in my career. When you do testing, make sure that you properly isolate for DR tests. There could be some catastrophic consequences. One of the there's a large organization in the U.S. that I did some consulting with, and we were brought in to rescue them. They actually, with a DR test, they were replicating Active Directory into this isolated DR environment, and someone forgot to do it to uncheck their VPN site-to-site VPN tunnel. And when that Active Directory server came up, it poisoned the rest of the Active Directory in the business, and it was weird. The whole business was down. In fact, they had a PBX system was actually running in their virtualized environment. They couldn't even answer the phone. Like everything was down because when AD went down, it ran for a short period of time until the authentication tokens expired, and then everything just basically fell off. And by the way, often stuff like that happens. They did the DR test, of course, on a Saturday, and they didn't realize they broke it until Sunday morning. So Murphy's Law is considering when that stuff happens. CryptoLocker, if you have a backup solution that writes to CIFS or SMB, consider the accounts and finding a way to isolate those accounts that would have access to the same shares for the CryptoLock backup. I've witnessed several companies today. That is how they have been, completely destroyed in the CryptoLocker, is the fact that an admin was the account that got compromised, and that admin account actually has access to look at those CIFS shares that their backup tool is actually writing to. So it basically crypto-locks everything, including the backup data. So if you create segmentation to make it so that those backup servers and the CIFS shares that they have connectivity to are in a whole different context from a security perspective, it helps to eliminate the risk of not having a recovery available as part of that. Another one is application DR, talking about the pets versus cattle. If an application has a mechanism for providing DR within the application, use it. I've witnessed before the example of, AD is a perfect example. AD, depending on the topologies that you have from a network perspective, whether it's layer 3 or stretch layer 2, the reality is you put an AD server, a live AD server in your DR site. And AD has its own way of a mechanism of providing that survivability. You don't want to be replicating that in a way when the actual application itself has that mechanism in it. The shared responsibility, this is often comes up, is understand if you're using cloud-based solutions today, understand what the risks are of those cloud solutions. And I'll use the example of O365. So you can, with today's O365, I mean, you can have long retention. So at the end of the day, you have your data, and there's mechanisms there to actually recover it. But there are some scenarios that where that falls down. So A is making sure you have the retention. An example in O365, if someone deletes an account, the actual data associated with it goes, and there's no mechanism to bring it back. And the other aspect is, if you had to bring it back en masse, or if you had to do it in a very granular nature, the tools that these providers may provide may not give you a lot of flexibility, or the actual mechanism to do it might be cantankerous and take a long time. So just consider, when it comes to data in the cloud, I've often had it where customers, and I mean, we're a cloud provider, and you get a customer that says, well, my stuff's in the cloud, right? I don't have to worry about it. And there's been instances where the customer didn't really understand, they didn't read fully their contract, and at the, what's in it. And if you read even the O365 contract, I mean, the reality is at the end of the day, you're kind of on your own in the event of a large scale disaster on that front. And the last one is the, the shameless self-promotion here, is the, DR expertise. Consider a hosted or a managed DR provider to help give you an easy button when it comes to disaster recovery. We do this all the time, especially when it comes to DR tests and planning and the stuff that comes with it, as in assessments and whatnot. Really at the end of the day, because we do it all the time, we have a lot of experience in it as well. So thank you. So I don't know if there's any questions. You can actually raise your hand, or if you want to type them in, that would be the other way of doing it. I have a question. What should we look for a hosting vendor? So when it comes to DR, one of the interesting scenarios in a hosted provider, one of the looking for someone that has depending on where you're at, they have multiple geographic options, especially in Canada. So Carbon60, we have 3 main data center geos with our services, and we offer services out of them, including Azure and AWS. But we have East Coast out of St. John, Toronto, and Vancouver as locations. So it all depends on, when you look at DR, you typically want to have your DR site in an area that has different risks than the area that you're currently in. And I'll use the example of a Category 5 hurricane. So many companies before Hurricane Katrina, some companies on the U.S. coast had their data centers both on the Gulf Coast. And the reality is when an event like Hurricane Katrina comes through, it impacts both of those data centers. So often, for us, we would use in Atlantic, we use Toronto as our DR site. In Vancouver, we use Toronto as our DR site. And in Toronto, we use either the Atlantic or the Vancouver side. Yeah, so Benny's question, the different tiers of the Uptime Institute. So all of our data centers are what we consider tier 3 capable. They're not tier 3 certified, but they are designed to basically have the same tier 3 standards, which is completely redundant and concurrently maintainable power systems. And so that's another thing to make sure of. The last thing you want is your DR site to have a failure in itself at the same time that you're having a failure within your business. So I don't know if there's any more questions, but I wanted to thank everybody. Much appreciate your time. We are going to send out my contact info and a recording of this or information on the presentation. And if you have any questions, at any point in time, feel free to reach out to me.